A criminal act has occurred, and they intend to find out not only how that occurred, but who did it. And the FBI, I think, was ready to jump in and take over control of the TWA Flight 800 investigation, and there was a great deal of pressure for them to take over the Egyptian air crash as well. You may recall in that one there was a great deal of back and forth between the State Department and the Egyptian government and the NTSB on that one, along with the FBI, until finally the U.S. authorities came to the conclusion that that had been a deliberate act by one of the co-pilots, and everybody backed off. Egypt did not want to pursue that. The FBI felt that wasn't within their mandate to pursue as well. So I think right now what you're seeing is as tragic as it is, the pretty set formula for what happens when an airplane goes down. First, we determine that it wasn't deliberate and not a crime, and if that's the preliminary indication, then this turns into a plain old-fashioned how did this happen type investigation, Ed.
Sources are telling you now that no one at the FBI is saying that there was an explosion on the board, and they have on board the plane, and they have no evidence that this is a crime.
They have no evidence right now that this was a crime. A very senior official says there is absolutely no evidence that this was an act of terrorism or an act of crime that has surfaced yet. He went on to point out, as correctly he should, however, that we need to underline the word yet. One of the things that is in the subtext of everything that we're all reporting here today, but we haven't really focused on, is that the United States is at war. No one in the universe that I deal with, which is the FBI, CIA, and Justice Department, believes in coincidences. And certainly that was the first indication this morning, was that this is the other shoe that we've been waiting to drop. This is the Osama bin Laden next wave of terrorism. But quickly, and I underline quickly, their indication came back that that's just not the case here. And I continue to detect that they have not changed their mind about that, Ed.
Thanks, Jim Stewart in Washington. CBS News White House correspondent John Roberts was in today's briefing at the White House. John, is the administration leaning one way or the other as to the cause of this accident?
Well, they're hedging their bets at this point, and not ruling anything in or out. But as Jim Stewart said, privately, senior administration officials are saying so far there is no evidence of terrorism. But they're being very careful about what they say publicly. They remember what happened several weeks ago when they came out and they reported on that anthrax case in Palm Beach County, saying it appears to be an isolated case, no evidence of terrorism, and then it turned out to be the first wave in a number of anthrax cases. So at this point, as Ari Fleischer said in the briefing about an hour ago, they are proceeding very slowly.
I want to be very cautious about any conclusions at this early time about what is the cause of this. As you know, first facts are often facts that are subject to greatest change, but the National Transportation Safety Board is the lead government agency doing the investigating.
And the fact that the National Transportation Safety Board, rather than the FBI, is the lead agency on this is an indication that the White House at least wants to put out the suggestion that they're proceeding as if this were an accident as opposed to an act of terrorism, a criminal act. Ari Fleischer also on the record today saying that there was nothing unusual about cockpit communications before the plane went down, quoting him saying all communications were normal prior to the crash, which would be an indication either that this incident happened so quickly and loss of control of the aircraft happened so quickly that the captain and the co-pilot didn't have a chance to radio in what was going on or even call a mayday, or it could also reflect the fact that the White House simply does not have all of the communications yet. And again, Ari Fleischer saying on that front that these are preliminary reports, first reports, that there were no unusual communications. The president was in the Situation Room getting a National Security Council briefing on an update in the war in Afghanistan when news came in about 9:17 that this plane had gone down. Governor Ridge, the director of Homeland Security, was brought into that meeting, immediately got on the phone with people from the FAA, the Department of Defense, the Department of Transportation, FEMA, and a number of different agencies trying to ascertain what was going on. At one point, they considered whether or not they should ground other aircraft that were flying in the United States and close down airspace over other cities, as they did back on September 11th. But then it was determined by the FAA that for the moment at least, the airspace should only be closed over New York City, and that's where we saw JFK, Newark, LaGuardia, and Westchester airports being closed down. The president, again, sending out a message of condolence to New Yorkers, to say that he can't believe that there is another tragedy, more hardship, more grief going on in a city that has already been so hard hit. Those messages of condolence expressed to Mayor Giuliani in a personal phone call from the president this morning. And obvious concerns from the White House today, Ed, as well about the economic impact of this. Of course, the president just recently crafted a bailout plan for the airlines, who had been already suffering terribly in the bad economy of 2001, and then really driven to the ground by what happened on September the 11th. Now the White House crossing its fingers to hope that this doesn't have too much more of an impact on the airline industry. Ari Fleischer at his briefing about an hour ago saying there were accidents prior to September the 11th, and the public continued to fly back then. The White House hoping that they will continue to fly after this. Ed?
John, this is a normal scheduled briefing. Do you expect anything else from Ari Fleischer later today?
Actually, Ed, this wasn't a normally scheduled briefing. Ari Fleischer was doing his best, actually, after working up at the United Nations General Assembly all weekend to kind of take today off. This was a briefing that had been hastily scheduled in the wake of what happened, to give us the latest facts that the White House has been able to ascertain. But unless the president decides to come out and publicly state his condolences to the city of New York and to the families of the victims on board the flight, we're not likely to hear from the president, unless, of course, it is determined that there may be an act of terrorism.
Thank you, John. We now have no report of casualties or survivors, but Mika Brzezinski, I'm told that family members of those on board are now heading out to the airport?
Some of them are streaming into Kennedy Airport. In fact, we have some video that's just come into us of some families arriving at Kennedy Airport. They, of course, are being cordoned off and ushered into a private locations. Airlines have been set up to do this process quite well ever since the crash years ago of TWA Flight 800, because what these people need right now is privacy and information, and they need to be put in an area where they can get that information away from the fray. I want to talk a little bit about the passenger information line for American Airlines Flight 587. Let me tell you what that number is one more time. It's 1-800-245-0999. This number is specifically for those who think they may have had someone on board Flight 587. Do not call unless you think you have someone on board that plane. Officials are dealing with families of 255 people who are believed to have been on board Flight 587. Now, of course, another thing important to bring out here, there are two sets of victims' families that officials have to deal with. Of course, those who were on the plane, and also those who were in the neighborhood in Queens, New York, where the plane went down. Those who were on the ground, we have reports of at least 4 buildings, 4 homes possibly, that were up in flames, and any other victims who may have been there when the plane went down. I can also tell you that triage centers have been set up near the scene at a high school and an elementary school, both right near the crash site, blocks away. They thankfully were closed today for the Veterans Day holiday. And also, we can tell you a hospital near the crash site has taken in about 15 people. A dozen people have come into the schools as well. All of them appear to have been injured on the ground, not on the plane. A lot of them dealing with smoke inhalation issues at this point. They'll be helping firefighters as well, who'll be coming in after dealing with this crash site, which is still very much a work in progress.
The fact that schools were closed today, Mika, means that a lot of kids probably would have been out on the streets
well,
playing.
That, and another thing that came to my mind is that, you know, the schools weren't hit, but we had children potentially at home. And we do know of homes that were hit or that were close to this crash site.
There were a number of houses that were on fire.
Yes, so in a sense it's a double-edged sword in a sense. I mean, school being closed is good, but they weren't the ones that were hit, they were home.
So here's what we know now. American Airlines Flight 587 crashed this morning out in the Rockaways, which is an area of Queens just south, I think, of John F. Kennedy Airport. It was a flight that was crowded, though not completely full. A total of 255 people on board, headed for Santo Domingo when it went down. There are some eyewitnesses who report seeing an explosion. There are some eyewitnesses who report seeing an engine fall off. What we do know is that the engine did fall off. We don't know if there was an explosion on the plane that caused the engine to fall off, or that there was some catastrophic engine failure. We do know from talking to Jim Stewart, who has been talking with his sources at the FBI in Washington, that contrary to a report that was issued by one of the wire services, that the FBI believes that there was an explosion on the plane. Jim Stewart says the FBI is telling him that they have no one who has made that statement, and they do not believe at this point that there was an explosion on the plane. As far as we know, and from what we can see of the footage here, that all of the passengers and all of the crew members are expected to have perished in this tragic flight. Immediately after the flight, all of the bridges and tunnels into New York City were closed, and then the bridges were reopened to outgoing traffic. The airports were closed in New York City: LaGuardia, John F. Kennedy, Newark Airport, as well as other airports in New Jersey and perhaps as far away as White Plains were closed because of the accident. Mika, has there been any word on when the airports would open? I can imagine that a lot of people were at the airport waiting to get at the airports waiting to get out today, who are probably still sitting out there.
Exactly.
What can we tell them?
Ari Fleischer actually was asked that question, and he had said earlier today at his briefing that, it doesn't appear at this point that there's any reason to keep them closed for an extended period of time, but it's safe to say that in reaction to this, given what happened on September 11th, they are going to make sure that this city is protected from the air, from the bridges, from the tunnels, from any way you can get in or out of this city. We had military jets flying over New York City ever since September 11th, so we had some reports that those were increased right after this happened. Of course, there is no indication, according to the FBI, that there is any sort of foul play involved here. But this is a city on high alert. This is a country at war. So they're going to take things slowly and carefully and really make decisions as they go along. My father was on a train coming to New York as this happened, and everybody on the train was told about this, knew about it, and all their plans are being changed as they come into New York City because they don't know if they'll be leaving.
I think that there was a sense of relief that I heard from a number of people who said that we hope the indications are that this was an accident, and there was a sense of relief that this was just an accident and not another terrorist incident. Let's now go down to Washington and Bob Orr. Bob?
Ed, I think we should try to clear up some confusion here. There's this ongoing debate about was there an explosion, was there not an explosion. We know about the Wire story saying that a Bush administration source said the FBI believes there was an explosion. We have to remember this. There well may have been an explosion on that airplane because airplanes themselves are highly volatile. You've got a lot of fuel there. You have high-speed rotating parts. You have electronics throughout the airplane. We know from TWA a spark can set off an explosion. So it might be there's some sensitivity on the law enforcement side that the word explosion seems to give a connotation to explosive, and the two things don't have to be the same. I mean, I think there is reasonable belief that something on the plane did explode. We know from the eyewitnesses that they saw the engine coming off. There are reports of the wing being on fire. There are noises that were heard. We see in the pictures, of course, that we've shown you over and over, what looks to be a sizable hole in the side of the engine. As it zooms in here, it's the round hole there in the highlight circle that the fireman is looking at. That hole is consistent with a quote-unquote explosion. I think the important thing to remember is if there was an explosion on the airplane, that very well could have been caused by the airplane and the airplane systems itself. And it doesn't necessarily mean that some explosive additive, some piece of plastic or a detonator had to be added. And I think we should probably get past this argument just to focus on the facts that we know, because the investigators that I've spoken with say they're pretty confident something did come apart in midair. Now the question is, what was that, Ed?
And what caused it to come apart.
Most importantly, what caused it, right?
The NTSB is the lead agency handling this, correct?
The NTSB is assigned by charter to handle transportation accidents. The presumption here by the government, based on what they know and all the evidence that's not there, is that this very likely was an aviation accident. Until they get the black boxes, until the metallurgists can go in and look at the crash debris and search for signs of an explosive residue, until there's some kind of claim of responsibility, if you will, or some kind of other evidence, intelligence or otherwise, saying that this was anything but an accident. The presumption is it's an accident, which means that the NTSB, as the lead agency, is there with teams of fire experts, metallurgy experts, engine experts, all trying to glean whatever clues they can from the crash debris. Then they'll go back to the lab with the black boxes and try to put together an answer. What's different in this investigation is that there is a tremendous pressure from the public and from the White House and from the administration at large to solve this crash quickly, if you will. Airplane crashes are complex, but at this point in time, with the nation on a war footing and with nerves frayed by what happened on September 11th, it's critically important that the public gets some kind of plausible reason with some kind of buttressing evidence as soon as is readily available, because otherwise the industry is still teetering in a very precarious spot. Ed?
And Bob, one quick question. Do they have a history of working well together, the NTSB and the FBI? Because the FBI also has to be out there conducting an investigation as we speak.
Well, I heard you talk to Jim Stewart about that. I think he hit it right on the head. In the past, there really wasn't much of a working relationship between the NTSB and the FBI. Routinely, in airplane accidents, they would send an FBI agent or two just to do some field checks for explosives and that kind of thing. But TWA changed that when it went down two parallel tracks. I mean, everyone remembers the great belief that it might have been a bomb or a missile and the subsequent finding of a mechanical failure. There was some friction, I'm told, between the FBI and the NTSB during the course of the investigation. But when it ended, I'm told there was a pretty good working relationship on what the ground rules were going to be from that time forward. Egypt Air was an example of the NTSB kept the investigation, even though they were tempted a couple of times to hand that off. Now, after September 11, I think every aircraft accident will start on two tracks. There will be the investigative side with the so-called tin kickers looking for aviation reasons, and the FBI side looking for explosives and analyzing intelligence information. At the moment, the preponderance of the evidence, and there isn't much evidence, but there doesn't seem to be any indication that this is some kind of terrorism. And until there is, the NTSB will lead the charge here.
Thanks, Bob. Now for the other major story, the continuing war in Afghanistan. Let's go to John Roberts for a quick update.
Well, Ed, we were hoping to hear a little bit from Ari Fleischer today, officially on the record, about what the White House thinks about these latest moves that the United Front has been making in the northern part of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, during the briefing, the air crash took up much of the questioning, and we weren't able to get any questions to them. Before I talk about Afghanistan, though, I should add one more voice, Ed. Ari Fleischer saying that no administration official told anyone that there had been an explosion on board the plane. So as to where that information came, it's absolutely a mystery. But the president, in terms of Afghanistan, has to be fairly pleased with the gains that the United Front has been able to make over the weekend. After 5 weeks of relative inaction, they managed to take Mazar-e-Sharif, move into several northern provinces, move into Herat, and then across the Shamali Plain toward the city of Kabul. If the president has any concern, it may be that things are going a little too quickly and wants to make sure that he can stop the United Front short of Kabul. He issued a plea on Saturday during his press conference with Pakistan's President General Musharraf, saying that he would like the United Front to stop short of Kabul because there needs to be a political solution for that city. He doesn't want to have a repeat of what happened in 1989 after the Soviets moved out, when there was intertribal warfare in that city, and there were horrendous atrocities being committed. General Musharraf also has his own agenda for Kabul. He does not want to see the United Front move in there, establish a government, and then have to try to move them back out again. Let's not forget that he was the main benefactor of the Taliban. He has a lot of Pashtuns who live in Pakistan, and he wants to see a broadly based coalition government installed in Kabul. So certainly General Musharraf had the ear of President Bush over the weekend on that front. President Bush also gave a very big plum to Pakistan on Saturday during that meeting, a pledge of more than $1 billion in aid as a reward for the loyalty that Musharraf has shown, something for him to take back to the people of Pakistan to say, when we get on the same page as the Americans, it's to our benefit. Musharraf also wanted a release of those F-16s that were promised to him prior to 1990 when they started developing nuclear weapons. He apparently did not make that request during the meeting, though it had been stated among lower officials prior prior to that, but the United States a little reluctant to give up the F-16s now because it could tip the balance of power between Pakistan and India, and that is again of great concern. But for the moment, even though the White House doesn't like to talk about operational details, Ed, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of optimism about the way that the campaign in Afghanistan is going.
John, correct me if I'm wrong. Weren't those F-16s paid for back in the 80s?
They were. They were promised to Pakistan. After Pakistan was discovered to have a nuclear program going, the F-16s were put on hold. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Clinton administration, feeling that Pakistan would never be able to get that delivery after it exploded nuclear weapons a couple of years ago, sold them to New Zealand. So unless New Zealand is willing to part with them, they'd either have to build new ones or get them back somehow.
Thank you. Senior White House correspondent John Roberts. Mika Brzezinski, today was a holiday, Veterans Day. The schools were closed, but Wall Street was open.
And there was reaction from Wall Street for sure, especially right after the plane went down. Let's take a look at how Wall Street is faring right now. We've got the Dow down just over 50 and the NASDAQ up over 6. Airline stocks, of course, hurting the most out of this. United Airlines and Delta Airlines down 10%. American Airlines down 13%. This, of course, an industry already in great pain due to what happened on 9/11. Here's what happened earlier in the past few hours. The stock market absolutely slumped midday on Monday. Somber investors just pulling right out of the airline and hotel shares after the crash, seeing what was happening live on television. One trader saying the mood is very nervous on Wall Street. They had been forecasting a higher opening, so this hurt pretty bad today. It was enough to send Wall Street pretty much down. Hotel, airline stocks, they tumbled upon word of the crash with fears that this would take another huge bite out of their industries. In the past 2 hours, we had the Dow Jones Industrial Average going down 147 points, and all 30 components of the blue chip index is floundering in negative territory. So this comes after on Friday, Wall Street finishing above its September 10th close. So there was good news on Friday, and of course now this. Things, though, as we told you, as we just showed you, are back up a bit. One analyst saying, you know, there was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction that happened there. The plumes of smoke floating into the New York City skyline probably just brought back so many bad memories that just as an emotional knee-jerk reaction, we sold off. So again, on Wall Street, some reaction today. Wall Street open, even though it is a holiday. Things do now appear, Ed, to be coming back bit by bit.
Down 50 points, given what's happened and given the history. That's not a bad day.
Not bad. It tumbled 147 at one point, but we're back up.
Let me now go to Bob Orr in Washington. And Bob, if you can set the scene for us, what does the NTSB do at this point? What is the first thing that they do when they arrive on scene? I assume they have to look for the black boxes.
Well, Ed, if I may preempt the question just with this, apparently in the last minute or so, the new chairwoman of the NTSB, Marion Blakey, has told reporters in Washington that they have now found both black boxes. It's not clear whether they've actually been retrieved, but they have found both black boxes in the wreckage. This is critically important. Of course, as we've said many, many times, there are two boxes. One is the cockpit voice recorder. The other is the flight data recorder. Both will be very critical here because we believe there was some type of explosion in the air. If that's the case, the cockpit voice tape very likely will pick up at least the beginnings of the sound of an explosion. It was true in Pan Am 103, it was true in TWA 800, and all other in-flight explosions. There's always a telltale sign on that cockpit tape. So that's number one, it could confirm that. Also, the cockpit tape, once it's analyzed, may be able to tell us, did the pilots, between the two of them, talk about some kind of known failure on the plane? Did they mention an explosion? Did they mention a fire? Did they talk about a mechanical failure? And then, maybe even more importantly, the flight data recorder should be able to tell us where the engines operated, how they operated, and what the flight controls on the airplane did. This is a big break in the investigation, and it comes early on, Ed.
Thanks, Bob. As you well know by now, the American Airlines flight on the way down to Santo Domingo crashed shortly after takeoff, about 2 minutes after takeoff. We're going to return you now to regular programming. Stay tuned to this CBS station or log on to the web at cbs.com for more on the crash of American Airlines Flight 587. And of course, we'll have complete coverage on tonight's CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. For now, Ed Bradley, CBS News, New York. Good day.
For news 24 hours a day, cbs.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
This is CBS.